Hello, everyone. This is Jacob Hopia, the producer of The Apex. In this episode, Jan interviews Gary Sirak. In this interview, Gary paints a picture of his early childhood, selling enough mints to pay for summer camp without talking, and the values his family instilled in him that still act as his moral compass today. You'll also get some practical financial advice from the man himself, so stay tuned if you want to know some of Gary's tips and tricks for navigating the pandemic economy. Gary has a new book coming soon. Want updates? Check out his website here at GarySirak.com. If you want to support us, there are 3 ways to do so. One is to donate to our cause at www.patreon.com/theapexpodcast. Second, visit our merch line that is proudly partnered with Envision Clothing Company at envisionclothingcompany.com. The final one is completely free. All we ask is if you learned something from this episode or know someone that needs to hear our message, share it with them. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your apex.
Welcome, Apex Chasers, to another episode of the Apex Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John Almacy, and unfortunately, because of, all the circumstances that are surrounding the planet, I'm not seated across from anybody today. I'm feeling a little bit alone in the studio, but the good news is that I have a fantastic individual on the other end of a phone line, yes, because we do have those capabilities, that is going to provide a lot of value today, specifically surrounding if your money could talk. There are so many things within that statement that I am excited to dive into today with our guest, Mr. Gary Sirak. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You having a good day so far?
So far, it's going to get better now. I can tell you that. So
Good.
I'm good to go.
I'm always in for a great conversation. So, Gary, out of all the things that we've done on our show here at the Apex Podcast, we really try to center ourselves around that ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. So what I'm really curious about is, to start, where did you grow up and what first got you interested in what you do today?
I grew up in 37th Street in Canton, Ohio, and we basically lived in a home that was built for maybe 3 people. There were 6 of us, so it was close quarters. And I really didn't get I kind of always liked to save money. It's just something I did, and it started in a really strange way. My parents bought me a bank, and it was one of these banks where if you put a nickel in, a dime, or a quarter, you could pull a lever, and it looked like a cash register. And once you reached $10, it would open up, and you could actually go in and get the money out. And that bank really intrigued me. I don't know why, but it was red, and I remember it very well. And what was interesting is that the way we got started putting money in the bank is my parents had me read a book, and for every book I read, I got 5 cents. And in the days, they had the bookmobile would come around our neighborhood, and I would go and get 5 books. And so every week I was making a quarter a week, which doesn't sound like much, but we're also talking in the 50s. So that was a long time ago. By the way, it's still not a whole lot, but it's how I got started. And that was really the beginning of me ever saving money and having any interest in money whatsoever, was putting those dimes, nickels, and quarters into that red bank.
Now something around that that area, the first time that you really remember saving money or being passionate about that, there was a story that we talked about. But when we first kind of met and we first kind of talked over this stuff, that I really want to hit, because I think that it's going to be able to provide a lot of context and value to the listener, and that's the stories surrounding the peppermint patties and your door-to-door sales as a kid, because nobody would believe, I didn't personally believe, that you were, a shy person, as you mentioned, as a child.
Yeah, I was somewhere past introvert. Basically, my best day was when I got to go to the corner of my house, and I would sit down in a corner, and I would basically amuse myself for hours. And I would do that with, actually, I had little plastic cowboys and Indians in a blanket, and I would build forts and things like that. It was kind of strange, but that's how I spent my time. So what happened is there were 3 of us, 3 kids, and my mom decided on Saturdays she could kind of get rid of me. So what we did is she would take me to the bus stop, which was on 36th Street, and I would have money enough to go to the YMCA. And every Saturday, I would get on the bus and I'd take my knapsack thing, which was basically my swimming suit and some other stuff. And she gave me enough money to buy lunch. And I would ride the bus to the YMCA, and I would spend the day in the YMCA and get on the bus and ride home at the end of the day on Saturday. And they'd show movies, we'd go swimming, and that's how my kids stuff went. Well, one Saturday they had a presentation about Camp Tippecanoe and this really wonderful camp, and they had a film about it, and they showed all these kids that were really happy, and they were out in this lake and doing things I had never done. So, in essence, what happened is I came home with a flyer, and I showed my mom that if I was willing to sell these mints, I literally could sell mints and qualify for 1 week of camp for free. And I came home, showed my mom the flyer. She looked at me and said, yeah, that's not really going to happen. And I said, why not? And she said, well, you don't talk to people. How are you going to sell mints when you don't talk? And I said, no, I can do this. And she said, I really don't think we're going to do this, Gary. I think it's a waste of our time. And I mean, she was busy. She had 2 other kids, and it just seemed like something that was really impossible in her mind.
Yeah,
I nagged her so much. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and the second half of that is that you definitely blew it out of the water, though.
Yeah, I killed it. So I nagged her so much, she finally said, yeah, let's go. So we went downtown, picked up 2 boxes of mints, 24 boxes, and I came home that day, and I put them on my little red wagon, and about 2 hours later, I came home, and they were all gone. And I laid $24 on the table. And my mom looked at me and said, what in the world did you do? And she said, how did you do this? And I pulled out a piece of paper, and it basically, I'd written in hand that said, I'm selling mints to go to camp, and if you'd like to buy a box, they're $1 each, and et cetera, et cetera. And I sold 24 boxes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I sold more boxes than anybody in the entire Y camp system. Ended up winning 2 weeks of camp, and got a sweatshirt, a T-shirt, a hat. I mean, everything they could throw at me because no one had ever done that before.
Yeah, so you went from mom saying, "Oh, there's no way you're going to be able to pull this off," to completely killing the entire game. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really strange, and I still wasn't talking to anybody. I'd say thank you, but I couldn't get the words out. So it just, I just was very shy, and so I would just hand them the note. They'd read the note, and yeah, that's kind of how it went. So.
Yeah, I have a friend that I know that he's a local guy that owns a clothing line, and he has a similar story surrounding like cross country, where his mom was essentially like, oh, you should stick to baseball or football. You're not built for cross country, and he was like, you don't think I can do it, do you? And then he ran cross country for all 4 years of high school.
Yeah,
so
I love that stuff. Yeah, just tell me something I can't do, and man, I want to do it. I mean, that's like tossing something on me and saying, hey, they throw things at me, and I just take that and turn it around and make it happen. I mean, I do everything I can in my power to make it happen, because when someone tells me I can't do something, that lights a fire.
I agree wholeheartedly. So, now you're make this transition as a kid, finding out that you're being resourceful, right? That you realize that's a very, resourceful entrepreneurial type of move to make as a kid that knows that they're shy and that they don't necessarily want to speak. So they pivot and use a piece of paper instead and get massive results. I'm curious, before we kind of continue the rest of the storyline and some of the other things that you've encountered, just as an overarching thing, have you seen that be something that is like a skill that you possess that maybe other people don't, as far as your natural ability to see a gap, and even if you don't have the proper skill set or something, you can adapt and overcome and kind of get the task done regardless?
Absolutely. I call it pivoting, and I pivot a lot. I played a lot of basketball as a kid, and one of the things you did in basketball is if you couldn't use one foot, you pivoted and used the other one. And basically, that's what I did. I learned how to shift gears and go a different direction, because that's what you had to do. And I've done that my entire life. When posed with an issue, my goal was to figure out a way around it. What's a workaround that's legit, that works, and it's positive, and that's really yes, yeah, and I've done that my entire life. And for some reason, I see things today, I see problems today, and I'm looking at solutions that maybe aren't traditional solutions, but they're a way around it that solves the problem and keeps everybody in the right place. So
Right, right. I think that is a irreplaceable skill set. It's not necessarily something you can teach. You can teach a portion of it, but I think that that's something that is ingrained and hardcore. Either partially nature gives you the neurons that are capable of making the connections, and then nurture as you're growing up, whether it's out of necessity or survival, or it's the way that your parents kind of raise you, that you end up with this ability to see the gap, as I say, to everybody else is focused on the words on the page, and you're trying to see the blank space in between the lines.
yeah, that's an excellent way to describe what I do. I mean, that really is, and I've been doing that my entire life. And you just hit it right on the head, because I think that is, and it is a skill set, and not everyone has it. I'm around plenty of people that do things for a living that don't really know how to do what I do, and I'm pretty sure what you do. So what happens is, once you reach a situation and you look and say, boy, that's impossible, and then I sit down and think, okay, what if it wasn't impossible? What would I do, and how would that work, and how would I craft something that would make sense to make it not so impossible?
Right.
And I might not solve the whole problem, but I might be able to chip away at it. It's really interesting when you do that.
Yeah, there's only one way to eat an elephant, right? Bite at a time.
Correct.
And
Exactly.
I think to your point with the not being able to figure out a solution or something like that, I've found it extremely interesting that if you see a solution, sometimes, or you see a problem, sometimes people's like general, um, how do I want to put it? They see the superficial problem, right? And then they see the infrastructure that's in place, and they're like, oh, that's just how it is. And I use dog food as an example, because somebody, decided that rather than the culture being feed the dog table scraps, let's create nutrition for the dog, but there was no infrastructure behind it. So sometimes it's not even solving the problem that you think you need to solve. It's coming up with the technology, or coming up with a process to put together infrastructure that will eventually solve the issue that you're actually trying to solve, and kind of reverse engineering it, which is what I think, from what I read in these, If Your Money Could Talk, and some of the other books that we're going to get to here now, is kind of your approach. You're reverse engineering finances, and teaching people, these potholes that people tend to step in, and then how to avoid them.
That is exactly what my purpose was in writing that book. It was just my frustration level with people and money is that they kept making the same mistake over and over and over again. And half the time they didn't even realize it, or they weren't aware of what they were doing until it was pointed out to them. And once it was pointed out, they say, wow, I never realized, I said, it's kind of like Groundhog Day, deja vu. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result. Let's shift gears a little. Let's just make a slight change and see what happens, and then let me know.
It's amazing too what, like, just a couple of degrees can change on a path. If you're a ship, and you're calculating your coordinates, and you're leaving a coast, and you're 1/1,000,000th of a degree off, by the time you get across the Atlantic Ocean, you're in a completely different country than what you anticipated. And I think that people underestimate when you make minor changes. They're always looking for these big fixes, these big solutions. But if you make those minor changes, maybe your money wouldn't talk crap behind your back when it wasn't around.
Yeah, it wouldn't say bad things in your ear. No, I agree with you completely. It wouldn't be whispering those nasty notes. No, I feel exactly the same way. And again, it's not, people try and do too much, and the whole point is not to do too much. It's just to get started and do a little. And if they really focus on that, everything changes. So
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example. I had coffee, and I'm a big coffee guy. So one of the things I like to do every morning is stop somewhere and pick up a mocha. And I'm addicted to those guys. I guess if you're going to be addicted to something, that's a pretty good addiction. So I get my mochas at about 4 or 5 different coffee shops. Well, yesterday I met a friend of mine at one, and we were sitting there chatting, and he said, I got to tell you something. And I haven't mentioned this to you. And I said, okay. And he said, your book, If Your Money Talks? I said, sure. He said, I have to tell you what I've been doing, and I never mentioned it, and we've been together many times. And I said, what are you doing, John? He said, Gary said I started doing what you told me to do. And I said, okay, what part? He said, the 10%. He said, I started focusing on saving 10%. And he said, when I started, I didn't have any money. He said, but I've been saving 10%, and I just made a dedicated move. I just decided I was going to put 10% in the drawer, whatever I'm doing. He said, I just said, that's it. And he told me today, he said, or yesterday, he said, I got like 40 grand saved that I would never have had I not done the 10% thing.
Right. Yeah. And
and I looked at him, I said, you have $40,000 you saved? And he said, no, this has been over about 3 years, but that's still pretty darn impressive.
Oh, yeah. No, and that's
for a guy who had no money at all. And he made money, but he always spent everything he made and then a little more.
Yep. And that's
happened.
People fall into those traps. They spend what they have, and then they realize they have a credit system, and then they overspend, and then they're stuck. I'm curious, Gary. Now, I want to talk a little bit about just the history of Sir-ack Financial in general, so that people can kind of get an outline. Outside of Gary Sirak, the author, you do run financial. That is your business. Tell us a little bit about that business itself and how it got started.
Okay, so my father started in 1957. Basically, he worked for my grandfather, who owned a wine distributing company. It went south, not literally, but figuratively. It kind of went under. And when that happened, my father realized he had no job, and he needed to find one, and he ended up selling insurance, which was a very tough thing to do. And quite frankly, he didn't sell much insurance to anybody, and for a number of years, literally made very little money. In fact, actually had to sell shoes on the weekends to cover, food, clothing, and shelter for us. And in fact, I tell the story.
Wow.
And it's not a story, it's true, that when I was a kid, I ate a lot of hot dogs, a lot of macaroni and cheese, and a lot of bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches. And by the way, I still like all three of those a lot. But those were things I grew up on. And once in a while, we'd have hamburger or something, but it was pretty rare because we just didn't have money. So those were food items that were cheap. I still like Kraft a lot, by the way. Anyhow, I'm not sure what it is, but it tastes good. So nonetheless, that was ingrained into me, and my father really struggled. Then all of a sudden, my dad, he kept searching for education. He was incredibly bright, and he was had a photographic memory. But he ended up getting educated in the insurance world, and all of a sudden, the world changed. All of a sudden, he started selling policies and building a business. Well, fast forward 63 years, I've been running Sir-ack Financial Services now for about 20, and we have about 15 employees, and we do insurance, investments, employee benefits, and helping people figure out money, and that's really what we do. And we're very successful at it, to be candid about it. We have a good reputation. We've worked very hard, and things have worked out well. I mean, it's been a good thing. But part of it is because of the culture my father brought to the table. I mean, he ran this thing for years, and he did it the right way. And I've followed in Dad's footsteps. It's pretty hard to screw that up if you just do what he did, which was treat people the right way and be good to them and make sure they're the most important person in the room, not you. So
yeah, I love the mission statement, kind of, I guess, if you will, that your father kind of established. It falls really similarly into kind of the mentality that I have, that if you really want to chase true success, the best way that you can do it is by helping other people achieve their dreams. And his was extremely similar. It's my job isn't to make as much money as I can; it's to help the other person in my room accomplish their goals.
Yeah, and I watched my father do that in action. I live with, we were partners for a long time. He passed away about 14 years ago, but my dad ingrained that into me, and it was one of those things. Once I finally understood it, it just made so much sense. And if I wasn't thinking about me, I was thinking about them. It took me a little while. I was a slow learner, but once I finally understood what he was telling me, it was great. In fact, one of the things he said to me one day, I was having a tough day, and he said, Gary said, quit trying to make money and just help people solve problems.
Mm.
I said,
Hmm.
so how does that make me money? He said, just trust the system, Gary. He said, just quit trying to make money. Just help people solve problems. You'll make more money than you ever dreamed. Hard to understand. I mean, it's just counterintuitive. So I'm going to stop working for money and I'll make more money. Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't really make sense, except it made all the sense in the world.
Right.
And he was 100% correct.
Yeah, I know when I talk to the businesses when I'm doing their marketing consulting or I'm doing brand strategy or anything like that, it's always if you stop focusing on selling, you're going to sell. They just kind of look at me like, what? Like, listen, in the landscape that's out there currently, 60 to 80% of your buying decisions made online before they ever step foot in your store. They're getting a lot of your customer base is getting a lot of their resources and a lot of their decision making from their friends on either social or some type of platform. And if you blend in with just ads and nothing but ads, you're constantly trying to sell, and you're not providing value, they're going to ignore you because there's thousands of other ads that are like that. But if you're an ad, that's legitimately providing value to people, people are going to stop. They're going to listen, and that kind of leads me into this place where I really think that there's going to be a lot of people that are listening to this because of the way that it's titled and knowing that you're a financial counselor or a financial advisor, if that's the term, that they would be looking for some type of advice. So in the current landscape that we're in, with the coronavirus, COVID-19, businesses shutting down, personal finances struggling, is there anything that's like an overarching piece of advice that if somebody is not implementing, it's absolutely something that they should start implementing right now when it comes to managing their money?
This is the obviously for everyone, and I mean around the world, this is the strangest. This is stranger than anything I've ever encountered by light years. So this is so unique and so bizarre. It almost defies imagination. But here we are. And if you told me, we would be shut down in the country, we'd be shut down in the world, and no one would be working, and how this would all come out, I just wouldn't even. I'd look at you and ask, what sci-fi movie are you watching? Except we're living this. So the fact that we're living it's made me think about this a lot. So one of the things I've thought back on, I have some real problems with. I have some empathy for people who haven't saved any money, and I have some problems with the fact that they haven't saved any money because stuff happens. And one of the things I really tried to highlight in my book was having an emergency fund is a big deal. It's not an insignificant thing. And I have clients of mine that will come to me and they say, well, I've got $500. And I look at them and I said, yeah, that's like a week. And they say, well, I live hand to mouth and all that stuff. I said, no, you don't. You blow money doing things all the time.
Right.
I said,
just
you
don't
need to
see
start
it.
putting money away. Right. And I said, so one of the things I had people really do, Jan, is track what they're spending their money on. And it is fascinating. And people will not do it. They refuse because they don't really want to know. So I'll never forget, I had a lady who waited tables, and she made a nice living. The virus has really hurt her because, now there's half the number of people in the restaurant. And again, the people are tipping pretty generously, but not enough to overcome what she went through. But one of the things I told her is I said, listen, you need to write down where your money goes. I said, every time you spend a dime, write it down. Let's see what you're really spending money on. And let's find out what's necessity and what's frivolous. And I said, so it would be very curious. Well, it turns out frivolous was, and no offense to Starbucks, but this lady stopped at Starbucks 4 times in a week. That's
Yeah, that
20
adds up
bucks,
quick.
real fast.
Oh yeah.
And she said, well, I really like Starbucks. I said, wait a minute. I said, so you're going to Starbucks? And I said, now, if you're making, you're running full tilt, so what? 20 bucks a week is nothing for you because you make $200 a night waiting tables. I said, well, you're not doing that.
Right.
She said, oh no. She said, that hasn't happened at all. And I said, so you're still spending the same 20 bucks at Starbucks, but you're not making any money.
Right. Yeah.
And
Now
she
your
said, well,
flow
I
is
get a
thrown
lot of
off.
pleasure in that. Yeah. And so the fireworks are going off all around. I say, wait a minute, this isn't good. So it wasn't just that. There were some other things. So we started talking about it, and it turns out she has some other habits that weren't good ones that she spent money on that she didn't need to. So it was a matter of putting those things down on paper, really looking at reality and saying, this is where my money goes. Now, the sad part of it is if you don't have those frivolous things and you don't have any money, that's a problem. And I've had clients of mine tap their IRAs, they tap their 401ks. I've had just a bunch of different things happen because they didn't have any savings. They had no fallback plan.
Right.
And I've always been an emergency fallback guy.
Right. Now, I'm curious for people that are listening to this that may be interested in, and coming and getting, becoming a client of Sir-ack Financial. What does that process look like? If somebody has never interacted with somebody to get financial advice, what would you tell them to make them comfortable as far as coming in and trusting you with their funds?
Well, the first thing is I don't charge fees to consult with people. I've learned a long time ago that that's not something, and again, that came from my father. I don't have an exclusivity. You have to have X amount of money for me to talk to you. I just don't buy that. So I have a number of people around me that work with me that are financial advisors, and I can set somebody up with somebody for the first time. They can have a conversation. They can help them. It's just more of a conversation than anything, Jan.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I just don't charge fees for that. And a lot of times I'll have people reach out because of the book. I've had a number of people come to me who, quite frankly, were really screwed up. And I said, sure, let's talk. And I gave them homework. Amazing how few of them would actually do the homework. But some of them would. And then they would come back and I would help them. And it's really interesting how many of those people have turned their life around financially. And again, it's more just getting some guidance and having someone to talk to. Here's the real reason I wrote that book. When I grew up, there was a lot of education that happened at my dinner table. My parents, who didn't have any money at all, talked about money a lot. And it wasn't good conversations, by the way. They weren't fun ones, but I sure learned a lot. And I kept my mouth shut because that was not a place to interact and ask questions. But what I've learned is most people didn't have the privilege of listening to people talk about money, didn't have good role models,
Right.
had nothing. And so what I tried to do is create a book that became somewhat of a role model, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people that don't even have that, dinner time conversation. I mean, there's a lot that happens. I think at those dinner tables, to your point right there, that is just educational stuff that you take with you throughout a lifetime. And having those good role models, like you said, like your father, just it's beautiful how much he shaped the organization, how much he shaped you, and then how fervently you've held on to those standards. That speaks a lot to the organization and to your character yourself.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that, and that actually means a lot because that's what I've really tried to do. So I'll give you one other interesting thing. I had someone come to see me. They knew about the book, and they came in and said, "Well, I want to copy your book." And I said, "Okay, they cost 15. You can have it for 10." He said, "Well, I just want you to give it to me." I said, "Really?" And I thought that was pretty gutsy anyhow. And I said, "Well, why would I give you my book?" He said, "Well, then I'll read it and then I'll come back and we'll do business." And I said, "No." I said, "You want my book? You buy my book because if I give it to you, you'll probably ignore it and think it's got no value." And I said, "That just doesn't work for me." And I said, "And furthermore, if you're not willing to invest $10, I'm not willing to invest my time in you."
Boom. Drop the mic.
Oh yeah, and I meant it because it's an investment. I mean, $10 is nothing, and what you can get out of that $10 book is a lot, as far as
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
concerned. At least that's what people around the country tell me. So.
Oh yeah, no, and putting together value with people is just it doesn't have to be $1,000 courses and all this other kind of stuff that people have online or these different places that you can go. Sometimes the best value that I've ever gotten is from a $10 book, or I paid. It's not even something I paid for; it's something that I found online that is a PDF that an independent person put together because they're passionate about a subject, and now I know a lot more than when I first started. But I think it's interesting. You said, I why would I give you the book? Because then you're going to ignore it. Because if it's free, you're going to believe it has no value. Why don't we let's explore that concept a little bit more? Why do you think that is with people?
I think people think if they don't pay for it, it must not have any value. So there's something in the system. And it's funny, I've had some of the best free advice over coffee and lunch that you could ever get. I mean, advice that has turned out to be worth thousands and thousands of dollars to me, just common sense. And it might cost me a lunch or it might cost me a cup of coffee somewhere. And people are willing to share that. But what I also know is that, I paid a price for that. I bought them lunch, I bought them coffee. And again, I think there's something perceived if you get it for free, it has no value. It can't be worth anything if you got it for free.
Right.
Why that is, I don't really know, but it's there and it's in the culture and it isn't going away.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I think about that all the time when I'm talking to other entrepreneurs, where I'm trying to help them with marketing or branding, and their go to market strategy is listen. You have to dictate your value. You dictate how premium you are, how good your customer service is, how much you focus on the relationships. And one thing I really want to focus on when you talked about the best piece of advice being the cost of it being the cost of a lunch. I want to elaborate on that for people and say, it probably wasn't just the cost of the lunch. It was the cost of your time investing in that person, building the friendship, building the relationship to the point where they trusted you enough that when you took them to lunch that one day, they were willing to give you advice that made thousands of dollars. But that relational equity that you put into people because they can tell that you care about people, that you're putting them first, that you abide by these principles and you're a person of character, that is what builds up over time and then leads to those, a $5 cup of coffee leading to thousands of dollars of advice.
Totally. And it's a trust factor and it's mentorship. I find mentorship really interesting. It's critical in my life, my mentors. And unfortunately, I've lost a bunch of them in the last, 3 or 4 years. And there's a mentor of mine who just passed away just recently at 85 years old. And he was brilliant. He was just such a smart man. And his name was Don. And I would call Don up and say, Don, what are you doing for lunch today? He said, let me see. I think you're buying, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. And so we would find a place to eat. And it was a guarantee. I mean, he liked the Desert Inn. We went to the Desert Inn.
That's
so,
awesome.
We would go wherever. And I said, Don, wherever you want to go, I'm picking up the tab. He said, oh, I know. He said, if you're tapping my brain, you're paying for lunch. I said, okay. And Don could buy lunches. Yeah, he was not hurting for money. So, but he was such a great source of information. He was such a wonderful sounding board, Jan. I could just sit and talk to Don for hours, and the things he would say. I mean, I filled a whole notebook just on things he said. And I have another friend is the exact same way. Unfortunately, he moved to Atlanta, and I would sit with him and chat. He loved John's bar, so I ate lunch at John's bar. So, it's one of those things where I say, where's your favorite place to eat? And they tell me. I said, great, we'll go there. I'll buy lunch. I bought a hell of a lot of lunches, but man, it was worth it.
I was going to say, you probably remember every single one of them, too.
Yeah, sure. I really do. And
with a mentor like that, it's hard to forget.
And so that's another thing. I find people aren't finding mentors. They're not looking for them. And that's really sad because mentors are so important. I mean, they've helped shape my career. I'm sure you have them in your world because you can't get to where we've gotten to without having help.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, if I would be the most narcissistic, egotistical person to believe that what I'm doing right now is anywhere near, just me. Yeah, what I tell people is that I happen to have an idea in my kitchen while I was cooking the one day. And I was like, you know what? I should start a blog as an outreach. And then it's snowballed wildly out of control. And a whole bunch of people way smarter than me latched onto the idea and took it and ran with it and just kind of puppet me around as the figurehead, which I'm perfectly okay with.
I love that. Yeah, that's cool.
I think that there's nothing more satisfying, and whether it's providing financial advice and seeing other people succeed. I found that it's really, really interesting when you have employees and you have this culture and they say, like Shway's Bahati, he's my director of user experience. Last night, we went out to Huth and Harris and just kind of talked. We just hung out and had a good moment to just kind of learn more about each other. And he posted, he was like, my boss is, super cool. Thanks for this. Thanks for, providing a good night and being so transparent. And, I now consider him a good friend. And I read that and I was like, first of all, it's super weird that you use the word boss. I don't know if I'm used to that quite yet. Um, but also that taking the time to be human and connect and offer mentorship down the line to the point where he's so passionate about what we're doing and how we do it at Apex because of he sees the standards that we hold ourselves to and how much we care about the community that he's on fire. And that's what I really strive for, what I think is beautiful about the way that you approach life. And why I think that we can, we could have conversations for hours. I could feel like, because of the similar
Pretty sure.
outlook on life and making sure that people are taken care of and they're passionate and they're, achieving their dreams.
It just means, so someone said to me, measure success. And I said, well, everybody measures it with money. And I said, that's okay up to a point. But then it gets to a point where it's not really ever about money. And believe me, being in the life insurance business, I am 100% sure that people don't take their money with them. That I know, because it's still here, and I give it to other
Right.
people as their beneficiaries. So I'm pretty sure that's the way that works. And I don't think they're taking their credit cards or their checkbooks, but that's a
Yeah.
whole other story. So when it gets right down to it, yes, money's important. We need that. It provides great things and it can be a wonderful tool. But that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is how many people can I help in my world to make their life better? And how do I do that? And how do I shape their life in a way where, so yesterday is a great example. I had a woman who's 85 years old, lovely lady, and she's just smart as can be, manages on her own, drives from Canton to Michigan, upper Michigan. She has a cabin, a cottage up there. Just a beautiful soul. Love talking to her, and spunky as hell. So we have a great conversation, and she has an estate planning issue, and I'm not an attorney, but I have good common sense, so we talked through it, and it was a wonderful conversation. Well, that afternoon, I have a couple in who are at 48, and they have 5 children, and he's a doctor, and she's a mother that takes care of all the kids. And the conversation was very different than the one I had with the woman earlier, but
Hmm.
also so rewarding because both of them had issues, and when they walked out the door, both of them turned to me and says, "You have no idea how much better this has made me feel. I feel like I now have a path. I didn't have that when I got here." And
Right.
if you were allowed to hug me, they would have hugged me. Of course, we're not. So we did the fifth thing, but nonetheless, it's so rewarding. And it wasn't about money; it was just about helping people do things that they need to do. It's a
There it
very
is.
cool feeling.
Yeah, it is amazing. Um, so to wrap all of this up into a nice little package, first I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come on the show. It's been a fantastic conversation. I love everything about um, you know finding out about guests with the process that we use is mostly just my years of being in the Air National Guard and learning how to creep on people online. I couldn't find a single negative thing, so that's a plus. And
Oh, that's
so that
cool.
everybody's that's out there, if you have financial problems or puzzles that you're trying to piece together, I would definitely chuck my recommendation in for Sir-ack Financial. But if we can end on this, I find this one line extremely interesting, and it's something that we talked about, on our pre-interview kind of thing. That's really kind of just rattled around in my brain since we talked about it. But I think in relations to this book, the if your money talked, what secrets would it tell? Uh, the line that was used for the contents of it, right, says that you offer guidance that is wise, practical, and infinitely time tested. So why don't we just end on, when the book is coming out and then that statement itself?
Okay. So that book is available today, and it's on my website at GarySirak.com.
Okay.
Available, and if you can't find, just call my office and we'll get you one. It's pretty easy. So that's there. And the time tested is, I watched my father do this. We've been around 63 years. I've been involved over 40. And the time tested part comes right from just meeting with so many people, thousands of people in so many different situations, and having the ability to sit in and watch my father, who was a master at what he did, and watch him operate, and how he dissected things and figured out how to solve problems, and then to be able to follow that legacy and do it myself, and observe other people doing it poorly or well. And it's just it's just a comfort level. I mean, when people bring me problems, if I don't know the answer, I find someone that does, And that's
Right.
part of it. The time tested part is I don't know everything. In fact, I don't know much of anything. But what I do know, I know. And what I don't know, I know how to find someone that does know. And just like yesterday, one of the people said, "Hey, we need to get a mortgage." I said, "Well, I have lots of mortgage people, but there's only one I'll use." And they looked at me
Right.
and said, "Okay, we'll use in that one."
Right.
And I said, "Good." And that's kind of how it works. And you just look around and you say, that it's that wisdom and that being confident in knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know.
Yeah. And so this American Dream Revisited. This is a book that you just recently wrote off of a conversation overheard at a coffee shop, right?
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
one, I really like that title, especially with what's going on with COVID and kind of the rebuilding. I'm calling it like the entrepreneurial renaissance. Um, we have a couple of minutes here. Why don't we talk about that book a little bit as well?
Sure. The American Dream Revisited all happened because I was sitting in a coffee shop called Karma Coffee. And it was early in the morning. I was drinking my mocha. I was kind of contemplating my week, my life. I don't know. It was just sitting there, kind of minding my own business, drinking my coffee. Well, four college students come in, sit right behind me, and they start talking about the American dream, except they weren't talking about the American dream, which, by the way, has always been a passion of mine. They called it the American disaster. And they just beat up on this country.
Mm.
And I'm looking at, and I'm not looking at them. I never did look at them. I just listened. And I kind of edged a little back and I said, this is interesting. And they were so negative. Three of them were incredibly negative, and it was about job market was terrible, and college
Mm.
debt was ridiculous, and credit card debt. And I mean, they were just negative on everything.
Right.
And I listened, and I thought to myself, wow, that is a terrible way to come out of college. But then one of the guys, the guy who had not said anything, was talking about, he felt very good about it. He said, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to pay my college loans. Yeah, I'll clean up my debt. He said, I'm going to have a good life. They pounded him verbally until he stopped talking.
Oh,
And
geez.
and then I got up and walked out with really bad karma. That really troubled me, that conversation. And about 3 nights later, in the middle of the night, I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning and decided I'm writing a book.
Mm.
And the result of that is the American Dream Revisited. And I went across the country interviewing people via phone. I interviewed over 25 people across the country. And the way I found them is I asked people like yourself, Jan, who's the most interesting person you ever met? Who's still living?
Mm.
And people would tell me, and then I'd say, do you think they'd want to talk to me? And some people say yes, some people say no. I reached out to all these people. Well, I did 25 interviews, and then I whittled it down to 13 because of different reasons, and that's how the book came into being. And they're from people from all over the country, all different walks of life, all different circumstances, and all had one thing in common: they achieved the American dream.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of wrap this with a quote um, from David Coleman, right, who's president of the Strategic Coach. But this is what David had to say about the book. He says, "This is one outstanding book. It is loaded with user-friendly, practical, sage advice on life, business, and relationships. It's an appropriate read for any age and reminds me of the classics Who Moved My Cheese and The 1 Minute Manager. As may be evident by now, I recommend it highly." So, I mean, I'm definitely going to be adding that to my list, and definitely listeners, if you guys have not already been hooked on the fact that Gary not only knows his stuff, but is also a very eloquent speaker. Imagine that being translated onto a page and being able to consume that at your pace. It's definitely something that I would highly recommend. So again, Gary, I just wanted to thank you again for popping on the Apex podcast. You were truly are an ordinary person that has accomplished extraordinary things, and I look forward to having many more conversations like this in the future, my friend.
Oh, I would love to do that, Jan. There isn't anything I enjoy literally more than this. I love talking about, helping people, and that's what you're all about. So you got me hooked.
Well, I appreciate that, man. So, is there a website or anything that people can go to if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, if you there's a lot, but if you YouTube me, Gary Sirak, or you go to my website, GarySirak.com. Yeah, we're all over the place, and we're there. So there's info about me.
Perfect.
Sometimes I just chuckle and say, "Really?" But that's okay. We're good.
Good. So if you guys are looking for those links, like he said, it's GarySirak.com. That's SIRAK.com. It'll be in the show description. And until next time, I hope everybody listening to this is having a phenomenal day, no matter what time it is, and that you keep chasing your apex.